Good morning. I'm Pastor Tully. Welcome to Maundy Thursday, of Holy Week for this year. I want to talk about the last week of Jesus's life. So much stuff happens in just the last week. There's all the big stories that we know about, like Palm Sunday and the Last Supper, the trial and crucifixion, Peter's denial, and Judas's betrayal. All of those things happen in just the last few days of Jesus' life. There's also some really other big and important stories that we may not remember or may not associate with the last week. There's several parables. There's the story about paying taxes to Caesar. There's this really weird story where Jesus kills a fig tree because he's hangry. There's the anointing at Bethany. And then, of course, the washing of the disciples' feet. It's also worth noting that Matthew, in particular, during the last week of Jesus' life, his teachings and parables have this more somber and gloomy tone to them. Things kind of take a turn for the worse, not just in the way that Jesus' life plays out, but in his teachings as well. And it's fitting that this is kind of what it would be like in the way the story and the narrative would play out right before Jesus is lynched. But so many of the stories take place in just the last week of Jesus' life. Jesus' whole ministry is about 3 years long, and yet the Gospels will devote a third of their chapters to just the last week of Jesus' life. Telling time in the Gospels is a little bit difficult because the writers, they didn't include timestamps, and people back then didn't keep track of time in the same very diligent and accurate way that we keep track of time today. So you kind of have to do some digging and some research. And so here are the clues. In John's Gospel, we know that that Jesus goes to 3 festivals. We think these are the Passover festivals. And so from that, we can infer that Jesus' ministry was about 3 years long. But yet in John's Gospel, over this 3-year period, almost half of the whole book is just the last week of his life. My favorite story that happens in the last week of Jesus' life is when Jesus cleanses the temple. It's a really important story, and it happens right after the Palm Sunday parade. Jesus, he gets into town, the people are going crazy, they're really happy he's there, and the first thing he does is he goes to the temple and he kicks out all the merchant. This is the most capitalism thing that Jesus does. It's the most violent thing that Jesus does. In the John version of this story, Jesus even makes a whip and is like whipping people and getting them out of the temple. And it's probably the most revolutionary and rebellious thing that Jesus does. We have to remember that this wasn't like a normal market of traders and merchants. This was a special market for selling sacrificial pigeons or doves, or even you may call them turtle doves, like in the very popular Christmas song. And so Jesus comes in and he flips over all the tables and he prevents their worship from happening because they can't sell these pigeons, which are used for sacrifice. I heard a preacher recently describe this story as Jesus robbed a church. And I think it's a really profound way of thinking about what Jesus did, because he was just in there and really upsetting people and disrupting the status quo. It's not a clear-cut case of good guys and bad guys, because the people that Jesus kicked out of the temple aren't the bad guys that we might assume they were. It's a lot to read in these stories, so I encourage you to unpack them. Go read them. It's Matthew 21:10, or Mark 11:11, or Luke 19:45, or John's version, which is 2:13. I'll put those references in the description below. Go read these stories for yourself. Jesus wanted to make things right in his last week of life, and that is why they killed him. All right, I'll see you tomorrow.